Roll up to this, Season 13, Episode 32 of the Ubuntu podcast. It's nearly Halloween. Today we are going to be discussing your tiling window manager feedback. We have some colourful command line love and then the rest of your wonderful feedback. And joining me this week are Mark.
Hello.
Hello, how are you today?
Not so bad. It's the nights are drawing in, the clocks are changed, it's getting towards winter. I'm going into hibernation mode.
Yeah. And Alan.
Hello,
how are you?
Tickety-boo, I've turned all the lights on to counteract this horrible darkness stuff.
Yes, I've got some mood lighting going on. I know the listeners can't see it, but you just imagine me bathed in purple and blue light. It's helping with my general well-being. Anyway, talking about general well-being, Mark, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
I have beaten Hades for the first time.
So how many levels are there in Hades?
Depends how you count them. There's either 4 or about 60.
That's the range.
There's sort of 4 main areas, but then it's split into rooms, so you probably have to fight through somewhere around 60 rooms to win a playthrough. But I beat it for the first time after playing for, well, the Switch only tells me I've played for more than 25 hours.
That's quite good value.
But your previous comment about the replayability was correct. I am still motivated to keep playing, even though I've, quote, won.
Is this a standard thing in the UI for all Switch games that just says more than 25 if you've done a lot?
Well, yeah, it goes in sort of steps. I think early on it tells you more granular, but then it's more than 25, more than 40, and so on.
Okay, right. But that's not the ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like 25 is a lot and then it stops telling you. It does tell you if you go further. It just doesn't tell you if it's 26, 27, 28.
Your chat of Switch over the last few weeks has made me hanker for one of these things.
Yes.
Sam has one, and I've been looking around and thinking, maybe I might add one of these to my Christmas list, perhaps.
The interesting thing that Hades has made me realise is I've played on the Switch quite a lot since I got it a year or two ago. This is the first time that I have not been satisfied with the Joy-Cons as controllers. Sitting and playing a few serious sessions of Hades starts to make my fingers ache. And so I'm wondering about alternatives. And one of the things I found this week, which has piqued my interest, was that there's someone who has made... they've got a little hobby project to make alternative firmware for the Steam controller, and one of the things they've done is write some firmware so that you can pair it with a Switch. And I'm now wondering if I want to risk bricking my Steam controller so I can use it on the Switch.
Can you not just pair any old Bluetooth controller with a Switch?
I don't think so. No. Yeah. I mean, I think the Bluetooth pairing might work, but actually, recognizing it as a valid controller, I don't think you can just do that.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, I've been looking at this because some of the 8-bit Do controllers are sort of specifically Switch-based, and when you start looking at their compatibility, they don't tend to work with PCs and Raspberry Pis and things, which is a bit frustrating because some of their more interesting controllers, the ones that I want, aren't necessarily compatible.
Interesting. My son has I don't know what it's called, the Switch Pro controller, maybe. That one. It is a really nice controller.
Is it?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get myself one.
I could see myself using that for extended periods of time. I'm a massive fan of the Steam controller, as you know, but the Pro controller actually feels really, really nice in my hands. And I don't have giant hands. I have kind of lady hands, and it kind of feels just right, and I can use it for an extended period.
I've been watching some reviews of controllers on YouTube, and it is well reviewed and well liked for sure. And in fact, I've been playing with different games controllers. So I've been playing a lot of Lego Worlds with my daughter, and we had switched back to the Steam controllers. Which is great because they're wireless. And we had been using the Xbox 360 controllers, but they come with about a country mile of cable each, and that was getting a bit annoying. So the Steam controllers are great for the wireless, but my daughter's hands are small and she doesn't like the big chunky Steam controller. So I was looking for something a bit more svelte-like, and I thought the DualShock controllers would be an option. So I was looking at getting those. And then I remembered that I had been a Stadia founder, and I had 2 boxes at the back of the room, which I've never opened. So I opened my Stadia boxes, cut the cellophane for the first time a year after they arrived.
Wow.
And got the 2 Stadia controllers out. And they're rather good. I really like them. So they have sort of the shape and size of a DualShock controller. And when they're plugged in over USB, they present as an Xbox 360 compatible controller. So they work with Steam and all the usual stuff on Linux really nicely. So we've been using those. So that works much better for general games playing. But then I thought, well, as I've busted out these Stadia controllers, I should probably give Stadia another try. And when I set that up on my tablet, it updated the firmware on both the controllers, which now means you can pair your Stadia controllers with your Wi-Fi access point. So when you play Stadia games, instead of the controller being plugged into the computer you're playing on, the controller is sending the control inputs directly over Wi-Fi to the Stadia servers.
Cloud.
Wow. And the idea is it reduces another step of latency in that whole input mechanism.
I thought that was always the case. I thought they always, I remember when it was announced, that was always intended to be the way that you would use it, especially if you're using the Chromecast, because then there is nothing for you to plug the controller into, because a Chromecast is just an HDMI, a USB powered HDMI dongle.
Right. So that was always the intention. It just didn't work with everything until quite recently. So I was playing Stadia in the Chrome browser, but didn't have the controller plugged in wired. The controller was connected over Wi-Fi because I thought I'd try this out and see what I think of it. Honestly, I can't tell any difference. And I went hunting around for some analysis, and there are people that have done very laborious, latency analysis of this versus plugged in. And apparently it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. But that said, I think the Stadia controllers have become our new favorite controller for PC gaming. And I've got a blue one and my daughter has a white one. So we even have our own sort of nominated controller. Right, with that, let's get on with the rest of the show. So we got quite a lot of feedback from you all about tiling window managers. So first of all, thank you all for sending us your feedback and experiences of using tiling window managers. And we're going to get into that now. And first of all, BigPod emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I am not a fan of tiling window managers personally, mainly because I would have to change my way of doing things so much. But I did use Qtile, a Python-based window manager, and I use config files made by Derek from DistroTube. I've heard of Qtile, not tried it. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and I think that what BigPod says is kind of where I landed in all of this. After looking at trying to configure some of the window managers and then having to recreate a desktop environment, I just didn't want any part of that. So by using Gtile, I was able to keep the rest of my GNOME configuration and, not have to rework my entire system. Alex Narayan emailed us.
I'm a die-hard Regolith user on Ubuntu 2004 LTS on my work laptop. It's so good and such an improvement over vanilla i3 that I have retrained myself around its whims. I'm finding myself being much more productive in such an opinionated desktop manager. It's even better on a higher resolution monitor.
Oh, I really did enjoy Regolith, but I think I'm the same as you were saying, and same as Big Pod said. I just can't keep retraining myself. I'm too happy with my current situation, I think.
Yeah, and I think people, if you are a tiling window manager, sort of enthusiast or aficionado, I think Regolith takes all of that hard work out of it for you, and you can just configure the nuances that suit you rather than having to create a whole shell experience. Jason Armstrong emailed us.
Hello, friends. On my iMac, I'm using Spectacle, and it's great. I went looking for one specifically because I missed it on my Elementary and Ubuntu Budgie installs. What's Spectacle?
Well, this is interesting. So this is something that enables you to do like quarter tiling and tiling type operations on Mac OS X. And I'm familiar with this because when I was looking at how to implement quarter tiling keyboard shortcuts in Ubuntu Mate, I was originally, some years previous, I'd bound them to the number pad, the 10 key, which a lot of computers just don't have anymore. So I was trying to think of a logical way of finding a key combination. I did some Googling and I found Spectacle, and I totally plagiarized the Spectacle key bindings and re-implemented them in Ubuntu Mate to control tiling, quarter tiling and window movement. John Church emailed us.
I'm a big fan of the i3 window manager and have been using it for several years now. For me, tiling windows just allows me to minimise my use of the mouse. i3 is also really lightweight, so everything is fast even on old hardware. Like Mark, I have to use Windows for work. The solution I came up with was a bit long-winded, but works perfectly once set up. Basically, I use Auto Hotkey and calculated the relevant coordinates for both my monitors. Then I can use the following to put the active window where I want it. Control plus numpad 0 to 9 for positions on the left screen, Alt plus numpad 0 to 9 for positions on the right screen, and he sent us a little map of the various positions he's got set up. It's not very flexible, as I'd have to recalculate everything if my resolution's changed, but having that logical layout with the number pad makes it really easy to use and remember the shortcuts.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's the muscle memory and knowing, like, once you've got your setup, I think this is the same for all people who use tiling window managers. I don't think it really matters which one you pick. Once you've picked one and you've committed those keyboard shortcuts to memory, you're golden. And, some people are committed to the one that they've chosen, and that memory is now written in read-only memory in their brain and therefore stays there. Whereas I've been using computers so long and have other keyboard shortcuts in my head, and it's very difficult to overwrite, get a strong enough write pulse to overwrite that muscle memory, I think.
Yes, it's interesting. There was actually someone else who emailed us with a very similar setup where they'd, specifically calculated the positions for their exact monitor resolution, which is great if you're always, if you're on a desktop which doesn't move, but if you're on a laptop which might be plugging and unplugging, it could be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
I actually have used Auto Hotkey on Windows, which is basically like a little configurable macro writer where you can pick a keyboard shortcut and then write a script and compile it into an executable, which you can then set to auto run, and you can do all sorts of things with it. It's really clever.
Brilliant. Come Stat Me left a comment on our subreddit /r/Ubuntu podcast.
As someone who uses Regolith OS on a laptop, I think I have to point out that you are not using i3 correctly. Maybe you learned this later in the episode. If you're on a laptop, just use the tab mode. It's very lightweight and usable desktop on laptops, but you must read the documentation in order to get the experience. Huh?
You're doing it wrong, Alan.
Yeah, apparently I'm holding it wrong. Okay, I'll take another look at that documentation, because I do still have a machine with Regolith, but I have logged out of the Regolith session and I've logged into a standard GNOME session on most of them. But on the X220, I've logged into the Unity session. So I've gone back to using Unity there.
How is that out of interest?
Oh, it's amazing. I've upgraded it all the way to 2010 and I'm still using Unity on it. And it's faster on my X220 than GNOME Shell is.
Ooh.
Adrian Bill emailed us.
Like Mark, I'm stuck on Windows for my work machine. I've been using Fancy Zones on it for about 6 months now and I absolutely love it. I think the team developing it is doing a great job. I particularly like how each virtual desktop can have its own layout. Tiling in general is very handy. I think that, apart from individuals who love the terminal, the approach G-Tiles and Fancy Zones takes is the right one. Since much of what I do revolves around Excel, I like being able to choose when things get resized. Mark, you should give Winget a try. It's still in its early days, but is very satisfying using a package manager on Windows, even if I cannot update or uninstall apps yet. So Winget is a sort of apt-get type package manager for Windows. And in fact, there is another one which has been around for a while called Chocolatey, which I use. I've actually used that to write a script to set up our development environment. So if we have a new developer, they have a script which they can run, and that installs all of our sort of web server and database server stuff locally. It's a pretty neat tool. So yeah, I've not actually checked out Winget yet, but I will at some point, I'm sure.
So Winget is an official Microsoft tool, and I've heard it referred to as Wing It, so I'm not sure whether it's Winget or Wing It, but we'll find out. But you'll find that Ubuntu is Winget installable, as are a whole bunch of other Ubuntu projects and things, with more in the pipeline. So we're getting firmly behind that. Jimmy G emailed us.
In addition to various tiling software you discussed, I wanted to mention the use of Pop! OS tiling in various GNOME desktops and the use of i3WM on various XFCE desktops, as I get to keep all the goodies of XFCE. Ever since I started using i3WM, Ubuntu and Mate about 3 years ago, my wrist stopped hurting, which was one of the main reasons I started looking for auto tiling and ways to reduce the use of a mouse. Yeah, that's interesting. Something we didn't really touch on was the side medical benefit of using tiling management, tiling window manager, or rather not moving your hand off the keyboard and being able to keep them on the home keys and, perhaps avoid wrist strain by moving your hand around.
Yeah, especially when you might have, if you've got a very big resolution monitor or an ultra wide monitor or two wide monitors side by side, so you're not having to drag a window miles and miles. If you want to move it to the left hand side of the left screen to the right hand side of the right screen, actually being able to do that with a keyboard shortcut.
I don't suffer from this problem because I use generally keyboards that have a nipple in them. And so my hands never leave the keyboard anyway. So the mouse is right under my fingers already. And this is one of the benefits, I think, of using the ThinkPad style keyboards.
And that's all of your tiling window manager feedback. And now it's time for some command line love. And I have brought the command line love to the show this week, and it is Liquid CTL or Liquid Cuttle. Anyway, it's Liquid something.
You're going to read this one out?
Sure. So this is a tool to enable you to configure your all-in-one coolers and RGB and stuff in your computer. I don't know if you've heard, but I've been building a new computer recently.
Hang on, rewind. I don't understand what you mean by all-in-one liquid cooler. What is an all-in-one liquid cooler for the Dumbo in the room?
Okay, an all-in-one liquid cooler is a heatsink that you stick on top of your CPU that has pipes attached to it, which is connected to a radiator, and it's pre-filled with coolant, and you screw fans onto that, and it's a integrated liquid cooling solution for your CPU without you having to do actual plumbing inside your computer.
Right. So it's like
it arrives pre-assembled
bundled thing. Right. That makes more sense. And so these things have, so there is electricity and water and now lighting involved in this all-in-one device.
Indeed. Welcome to 2020, Alan.
Not necessarily water. There was a guy who did it with iron brew.
I wonder if it comes pre-supplied with iron brew. What does this do? What does Liquid Cuttle do?
Well, at its most basic, it enables you to control the fan speed of the fans attached to the radiator and the pump speed, the impeller speed in the cooling block that's attached to the CPU. But because current year, RGB is a thing. So the new all-in-one cooler that I got for my new computer came with RGB fans and an animated RGB surface on the cooling block. So this enables me to define the fan curves, and it automatically ramps the fan levels, based on the CPU temperature. But more importantly, I have a fancy light show in my computer now, which is created using Liquid CTL.
Interesting.
It also enables me to set the RGB color pattern on my new shiny GPU as well, and motherboard. So,
any other LEDs that you want to tell us about?
I have so many lights in my new computer. It's embarrassing. I've decided to embrace this new revolution and see how good the support is in Linux. And whilst it's all command line driven, you can, pretty much configure all of these things now. But anyway, Liquid CTL, it's available on GitHub. There's installations instructions available from their GitHub page, and I've got a couple of examples of what you can do to list the devices that are in your computer that can be configured and managed via Liquid CTL, how I configured my amazing light show on my cooling block, and how I configured a fan curve to change the speed of the fans based on the temperature of the CPU. I think it's cracking. Right. Let's move on with the rest of the show. And now it is time for the rest of your wonderful feedback. So first of all, Chuzu emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
Why is the flavour naming scheme not the same? You have Ubuntu, Kubuntu and Xubuntu, then go off for Mate, Budgie, etc. I use Mate, but occasionally call it Mubuntu to friends asking.
So, originally, the first flavour, if you like, of Ubuntu was Ubuntu proper. And then along came Jonathan Riddell, who pitched to Canonical, hey, there should be a KDE flavour of this thing, and we should call it Kubuntu. I can't remember exactly who came up with the name, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. I
think Kubuntu was also another word that meant something, alongside Ubuntu being a word that means something.
You sure about that?
I'm sure I read that.
I'm not so sure, but I'm sure someone will send us feedback to let us know.
Yes.
But this is all in the early days of Ubuntu, and
there was Edubuntu as well.
Edubuntu, yes.
Yes.
And there was a few others. And then it started to get a bit silly, and there were quite a lot of them, and it became a little bit confusing as to which one was which, and it didn't really tell you much about the flavor just by putting a different initial letter on the front of it. And if you created a new one with a letter C at the front of it as Kubuntu, if you said it to someone, it sounds like Kubuntu, right? And it could be a command line version of Ubuntu, or it could be a CDE desktop version of Ubuntu. Having just a single letter denote what type of flavor it is wasn't actually particularly good. It worked for the first few, but it doesn't scale. And the technical board came up with a new naming scheme where basically anything that is something Ubuntu probably wouldn't be approved as an official flavor, but they came up with a better naming scheme where you can say something is an Ubuntu remix, where it's taking Ubuntu, building on top of it with a different desktop or with some other new and unique features or applications or whatever, and call it a remix. And that's exactly what happened with Ubuntu Mate. It was Ubuntu Mate Remix. And the same thing happened with a bunch of the others. People thought, well, why don't we just be consistent with the old names of Kubuntu and Xubuntu and just put a letter in front of it? And they didn't know the history, and they didn't realize that there is actually this other naming convention that we have for remixes and flavors and derivatives. And so I think it's just ignorance that people think that you could just slap any letter on the front and call that a flavor. That's not the idea.
In fact, when I was creating Ubuntu Mate, and I thought, wrongly at the time, it would be Ubuntu, I went off looking at the domains, and Canonical have pre-registered all of the star Ubuntu domains in order to sort of protect them. Ian Forbes and Status suggested names for the groovy gorilla mascot.
Ian suggested a male called Gunter and a female called Gwendolyn, and Statice suggested it had to be Gus the Groovy Gorilla.
I quite like Gwendolyn.
Yeah, I like Gwendolyn as well. It's a great name. I don't know, do we have to have a name for it?
We don't have to.
Which one was the first? It was Felicity was the first one to have a name, as far as I'm aware. I don't think any flavor before that, any mascot before that has actually had a proper name. Yeah, you're welcome.
Brian Masney emailed us.
On the last episode, you were talking about the 6502 CPU. Ben Eater has a really good YouTube series about building a computer with a 6502 at eater.net/6502 that you may be interested in.
Thanks very much for that, Brian. I've added that to my things to read and look at in the evenings, but it hasn't bubbled up to the top of my list yet, but I will get to it. Dave Wickham finally emailed us after 12 years.
I've been enjoying playing with ESP8266s and ESP32s. They're very cheap Wi-Fi enabled microcontrollers with a lot of community support and options for how to program them. I like using MicroPython, as there's something rather fun about having an interactive Python shell over Wi-Fi on a device that costs a couple of quid. But I've also got a number of them set up with various sensors running ESP Home, a firmware that allows for easy integration with Home Assistant. Home Assistant is a powerful and easy to use open source self-hosted platform for controlling things. It can talk to a vast array of devices and services. It supports automation. Configuration is primarily via a web UI and is under a very active development. I share Mark's concern about making my home rely on the internet, and Home Assistant makes that go away. I would recommend anyone doing IoT takes a look at it. Yeah, I've heard about Home Assistant, but I've never actually installed it and had a proper crack at configuring it, because I've already got all of the horrible proprietary cloud-enabled things. So maybe this is something, Mark, you might want to have a look at for us.
I've actually installed Home Assistant because I was wondering if I could get some of the horrible proprietary cloud-enabled things working with it, but I couldn't work out what protocol, if any, they used. Or if you just had to connect them to their own box. But yes, I do like the sound of playing with some of this stuff at some point.
So I know some of the things use Zigbee, and you can get a Zigbee USB adapter and plug it into your machine that's got Home Assistant, and then it can see things like light bulbs and stuff. But I found when I installed Home Assistant and I went through the wizard, it just found tons of stuff in my house. It just found all the things that are connected over Wi-Fi, because I think it just uses Avahi and other discovery protocols. I think it's pretty clever at finding stuff in your house. If it's there already and connected to the network. So might be worth installing it and just running through the wizard and see what it finds.
Yeah.
And for anyone else interested in taking a look at Home Assistant, we'll have links to all of the devices and projects that Dave mentioned in his feedback. Brandon emailed us.
I used to care about security of my devices and custom built them, but it got to the point of being a job. A community would shutter, a project or standard would change, and I'd have to rebuild some part of my smart house. Now I just don't care anymore and slap an IoT device on the IoT network and call it done. Kindred spirit there, Alan.
Yes, it is. That is the life is too short approach to installing software and hardware in the home.
Yeah, I imagine an awful lot of people fall into this very comfortable place. John Calderon emailed us.
While listening to episode 30 of the podcast, I decided to do a quick count of my own devices. 2 IP cams for home security, not firewalled but password protected. 1 Raspberry Pi running Ubuntu 2004 connected to a USB webcam, which also provides a security function using the Motion software. 1 Amazon Echo Dot. 1 Google Home Mini in the kitchen as an audio player and kitchen timer. 2 Chromecast devices. 1 for me and 1 exclusively for my dog, who gets streamed his dog sitting program from my YouTube account while I'm away. It has soothing audio and color adjusted footage of relaxing country walks for him to view to pass the time. I've been tempted on more than one occasion to purchase an treat feeder for my dog, which has an app that would allow me to monitor him, speak to him, and dispense treats remotely. Oh, I love the sound of that.
I do as well.
I'm sure there was an OggCamp talk in Canterbury about a remote internet-enabled cat treat dispenser and monitoring program, I think. Which they'd added things to sort of get the cat's attention and make sure that it was there and okay, and it sort of watched the windowsill where it normally sat.
I think I need to get this treat feeder for a dog, but also get the prerequisite dog.
I thought you were going to say just get it to feed treats to you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it can fling chicken wings across the room, however. And Woody Carver emailed ThinkPad Corner.
Hours of brainwashing from Alan has convinced me to get a ThinkPad. I'm looking for something roughly 2 to 4 years old, so a T480 seems right. But at the same time, I'm keen on a good screen, and the X1 is tempting. How much better do you think the screen is on the X1, and is it worth the price bump? Maybe I should get an older X1 instead of a newer T-series. Any thoughts are appreciated, and of course, good Linux support is key.
Well, this is tricky because I don't own anything newer than a T450, but having done some research in the past, personally, I would be more inclined to get the T480. It is possible to replace the screen, so you could put a different screen in it, and that's exactly what I did on my T450. I've mentioned before that I replaced the highly reflective display with a matte one that I bought from a company online. I think they were called LCD screens for laptops.co.uk or something like ludicrous, but they're actually a genuine company. The X1 I'm really wary of. It looks very nice. It's very sleek, but I don't like the fact that it's really hard to make any changes to the internals. It's not as expandable as any of the other models, but obviously that depends on what you're after. And if you actually care about the lightness, if you're going to be carrying it around a lot, then the X1 is actually quite a nice machine to use. But if you're going to use it on a desk and you want to be able to dock it, then some of the other models are probably more interesting. And Woody has said that he's considered looking at newer T-series. The problem is the newer T-series have the same problem that the X1 has, in that some of the newer ones are even less modifiable and have soldered on RAM. So it's actually, you lose some of those benefits that the older T-series had. So I think the T480 is a very capable machine. My T450 is still very capable. So, if you're looking for relatively decent performance, something a couple of years old like a T480 is great.
So you mentioned replacing the screen on your T450 there. I think it's worth pointing out that you don't consider yourself a sort of expert hardware modder, right? This is not beyond...
God, no.
Right. So I didn't want to this isn't a slight. This is encouragement for people that are hearing this thinking there's no way I would tackle something like that. You felt comfortable doing that.
So we live in 2020 and there are YouTube tutorial videos telling you how to do absolutely everything. I've changed motors in my washing machine and all manner of other things that I don't feel qualified or skilled enough to do, but someone else has done it on a video and I can watch it frame by frame and then figure out how to do it. And that's exactly the same for a screen on a ThinkPad. It's not hard. It's literally a 10-minute job if you've got the right screwdriver. You just peel off the front, unscrew half a dozen screws, take the screen out, put the new one in, peel off the new layer, screw it back in, put the thing in, and that's 10 minutes and you're done. It's replacing the screen on that particular model of ThinkPad, if you have the right screen, is actually a really straightforward job. What's hard, I think, is changing the screen resolution. If you're putting a different non-native resolution where it needs an interface board, or you have to be very careful about which model of display you get, that can be harder. And I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to replace like for like, but not a shiny screen. I wanted a matte screen. But if you want a lightweight machine, the X series and the X Carbons are really nice.
Yep. And I would also say that if you do get an older laptop, an older ThinkPad, and then you do a modification like that, your sense of ownership over that computer is going to go up 100%. You will now be attached to that computer for life. Insert 13 ThinkPads that Alan has. Right. And that rounds up all of your feedback. Thanks for sending it in. And in fact, that is it for episode 32. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week when we'll be discussing community news, goings on, maybe events. Do those still happen anymore? Who knows? If you want to send us your feedback, then you can email us at show@ubuntupodcast.org. And maybe you're listening to this on a podcatcher, but you could also listen to us on youtube.com/ubuntupodcast. And we'd like to say thank you to Bitfolk, who have been sponsoring our VPS for over 13 years. If you are looking for a fine VPS, then head to bitfolk.com. We'll speak to you next time.